The Whispering Hollow. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the gravel road leading to the Hargrave farm into a river of mud. Detective Mara Cole gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles whitening as the cruiser's headlights cut through the darkness. The dispatcher's voice still echoed in her mind, sharp with unease. Single victim, no visible wounds. But the eyes, detective, the eyes are gone. Asterisk. The farmhouse loomed ahead, its sagging porch and broken shutters giving it the appearance of a skull half buried in the earth. Deputy Riggs stood beneath the flickering glow of a patrol light, his face drawn and pale. He didn't speak as Mara approached, just handed her a flashlight and stepped aside, his silence more unnerving than any warning. The stench hit her the moment she crossed the threshold, thick and cloying, the scent of spoiled meat and something metallic beneath it. The kitchen was frozen in time, a coffee cup still steaming on the counter, a newspaper spread open as if someone had just been reading it. And then she saw the body. Lucas Hargrave lay on his back, arms splayed, fingers curled like he had been clawing at the air. His mouth was stretched wide in a soundless scream, lips cracked and bleeding. But it was his eyes, or what remained of them, that made Mara's breath catch. The sockets were empty, not torn out, not gouged, but clean, as if the eyes had never been there at all. The skin around them was smooth, unbroken, no blood, no bruising, just two perfect hollow voids staring up at the ceiling. Mara crouched beside the body, her gloved fingers hovering over his wrist. His skin was cold, too cold, but when she pressed a thermometer to his arm, the reading came back normal. 98.6 degrees, as if he were still alive. Riggs cleared his throat from the doorway. Neighbors didn't hear anything. Wife's been out of town since Tuesday. He hesitated, then added, Mailman says he saw Lucas yesterday, standing right there on the porch, laughing with a man in a black suit. Mara's flashlight beam swept across the wall, catching on something etched into the peeling wallpaper, a series of spirals twisting inward, smaller and smaller until they disappeared into a point. Her stomach lurched. She had seen those symbols before. In her dreams. Chapter 2. The Archive of the Forgotten. The Blackwater Public Library was a relic of another time. Its oak shelves bowed under the weight of decades-old newspapers and ledgers, thick with dust. Mara had spent the night there before, chasing leads that vanished like smoke. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't just looking for answers. She was looking for a pattern. Mrs. Peabody, the librarian, watched her from behind the circulation desk, her gnarled fingers wrapped around a chipped teacup. She didn't ask why Mara was there so late. She just nodded, as if she had been expecting her. "You're looking for the others," she said, her voice a dry whisper. Mara didn't look up. "How many have there been?" 6, maybe 7. Mrs. Peabody set down her cup. "Depends on who you ask." Mara pulled a file from the stack in front of her. October 31st, 1982. The headline screamed up at her, "Local boy vanishes in Whispering Hollow. Playmates claim the shadow man took him." The boy in the photograph was unmistakable. Lucas Hargrave, age 6. The same face as the corpse in the morgue. Mara's hands shook as she flipped through the other files. Daniel Brewer, 1983. Rebecca Shaw, 1991. The Feld twins, 2005. All of them found with the same hollow eyes, the same unnatural preservation. All of them declared unsolved. Their cases buried under Sheriff Crane's heavy red stamp. Mrs. Peabody leaned in, her breath sour with age. Folks say the hollow's hungry again. It always starts with the eyes. Mara's throat tightened. What is it? The old woman didn't answer. Instead, she slid a leather-bound journal across the table. The cover was worn, the initials EC stamped in flaking gold. Sheriff Elias Crane's personal diary. Mara opened it to the last entry. I saw him tonight, the shadow man. He was standing at the edge of the hollow, waiting. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. I knew what he wanted. A life for a life. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. The next page was splattered with something dark and dried. Blood. And beneath it, a single sentence, scrawled in a shaking hand. God help me, I gave him the boy. Chapter 3. The Shadow Man's Deal. The wind howled through the trees as Mara stood at the edge of Whispering Hollow, the sheriff's diary clutched in her hands. The air here was different, thicker, heavier, as if the very atmosphere resisted being breathed. She had read Crane's journal cover to cover. The truth was worse than she imagined. 30 years ago, Crane had made a bargain, a child's life in exchange for the town's safety. Lucas Hargrave had been the price, but the hollow was never satisfied. It demanded more, and now it was hungry again. A twig snapped behind her. Mara spun, her hand flying to her gun, but there was nothing there. Just the trees, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the moonlit sky. Then she saw it, a figure standing at the far edge of the clearing. Tall, too tall, dressed in a black suit that seemed to drink in the light. The shadow man didn't move, didn't speak, but Mara heard the words anyway, slithering into her mind like a snake. You've been looking for me. Her breath fogged in the air, though the night was warm. The symbols from the farmhouse wall burned behind her eyelids. The last photograph. Detective Sarah Whitlow's fingers trembled as she peeled back the yellowed envelope flap. The crime scene unit had found it taped beneath the victim's dresser, a single black and white photograph dated September 12, 1947, the same date as the first disappearance in Cedar Hills history. The image showed 7 children standing in front of the old mill, their faces blurred as if they'd been moving when the picture was taken. Except one. A little girl in the center stared directly at the camera, her eyes wide with terror. Sarah's breath caught. She knew that face. Emily Parker, age 9, reported missing yesterday. Sarah's desk phone rang, shattering the silence. The medical examiner's voice crackled through the receiver. You need to come down here. We found something inside the newest victim. The morgue's fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects as Sarah pulled back the sheet. 12-year-old Tommy Fisher lay on the steel table, his skin waxy and pale. The Y incision stretched from his collarbone to his abdomen, neatly stitched. Look at this, the ME said, lifting a magnifying glass over the boy's left forearm. Embedded beneath the skin, visible only at certain angles, were words. Tiny, precise letters carved into the flesh itself. I see you too now. Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd seen that phrase before, scrawled in the margins of Emily Parker's diary. Back at the station, Sarah spread the photograph across her desk. Using a magnifier, she examined each blurred face. Her coffee cup slipped from numb fingers when she realized the distortions weren't from movement. Each child's face had been meticulously scratched out, all except Emily's. As Sarah watched, a fresh scratch appeared across another face in the photograph. The phone rang again. Another child was missing. The clock on the wall ticked louder. Sarah reached for her evidence bag, then froze. The photograph had changed again. Now only 4 faces remained unmarked, and Emily's eyes in the photo were no longer staring at the camera. They were staring at Sarah. Part 2. The Developing Room. The darkroom chemicals burned Sarah's nostrils as she examined the negatives. The Cedar Hill Gazette's archives held every local photo from 1947, all stored in mildewed boxes in the basement. Her flashlight beam shook as she held the negative up to the red safe light. The children's faces were clear here, untouched. Sarah's pulse pounded in her ears as she recognized the boy in the striped shirt, Mayor Calloway at age 11. A floorboard creaked behind her. Sarah spun, knocking over a tray of developer fluid. The acrid smell of acetic acid filled the air as the liquid spread across the concrete floor, revealing words scratched into the concrete beneath. They made us stand still for the picture. The darkroom door slammed shut. The safe light flickered. When Sarah turned back to the light table, the negative had changed. Now it showed 8 children. Emily Parker stood at the end, her small hand gripping the arm of a tall figure in a photographer's cloak. His face was nothing but a black smear. Sarah's radio crackled to life. "Detective? We found another one. You need to..." The transmission dissolved into static. When the safe light came back on, the negative showed 9 figures. The newest edition stood directly behind Sarah's position. Part 3. The Final Exposure. The rain fell in sheets as Sarah burst into the abandoned mill. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating decades of dust and rotting wood. In the center of the main floor stood 7 small chairs arranged in a semicircle. 6 were empty. The 7th held Emily Parker's lifeless body, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes had been removed with surgical precision. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she noticed the fresh footprints in the dust. Children's sizes, leading to the basement door. The darkroom negative burned in her pocket. It now showed all 9 figures standing together. The photographer's hand rested on the shoulder of the newest edition, a blurred adult figure Sarah recognized as herself. A metallic click echoed through the mill. Sarah turned slowly. On the far wall, an antique camera sat mounted on a tripod, its lens cap removed. The shutter clicked again on its own. Somewhere in the darkness, a child's voice whispered, "Smile for the picture, detective." Star. The flash blinded her. When Sarah's vision cleared, she stood outside the mill in broad daylight. A group of children played nearby. One turned to her, a boy in a striped shirt who looked exactly like the young mayor from the photograph. "Miss," he called, "you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah opened her mouth to respond when she felt it, the photograph in her pocket. She pulled it out with trembling hands. The image now showed the mill's exterior. All 9 figures stood together, their faces finally clear. Sarah's own face stared back from the photograph, her expression frozen in terror. The boy in the striped shirt tilted his head. "Hey, that's a neat camera. Can you take our picture?" Sarah looked down at the vintage Leica that had somehow appeared in her hands. The lens focused itself with a soft whir. Somewhere in the distance, a shutter clicked. The children lined up in front of the mill, smiling. Sarah tried to drop the camera, but her finger pressed the shutter button on its own. The flash exploded like a star. When it faded, the children were gone. Only the photograph remained, developing instantly in her hands. 7 blurry faces, 2 clear ones at the end. Emily Parker, eyes wide with fear, and Sarah herself screaming soundlessly as a shadowy figure placed its hands on her shoulders from behind. At the bottom of the photo, new words had appeared in elegant script. The exposure takes exactly 60 years. Welcome to the collection, detective. Sarah turned to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The camera clicked again behind her. Somewhere in Cedar Hill, a child disappeared. And in the police evidence locker, a new photograph slowly developed in its envelope. 8 blurry faces, 1 clear. The locket. The package arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, left at the precinct's front desk with no postage and no return address. Detective Eleanor Voss nearly handed it off to evidence until she turned the small brown parcel over in her hands and saw the faded ink spelling out her name in spidery cursive. The handwriting looked strangely familiar, like something from an old birthday card she couldn't quite place. She slit the tape with her pocket knife, the paper crackling as it gave way to reveal a velvet-lined box inside. Nestled in the fabric lay a silver locket, tarnished nearly black at the edges. The chain slithered cold against her fingers when she lifted it, so icy it nearly burned. Eleanor's breath caught as she pried open the delicate clasp with her thumbnail. The photograph inside made her coffee cup slip from her grasp, shattering on the precinct's tile floor. It showed a little girl with dark braids standing in front of the wrought iron gates of the Hadley orphanage, her pinafore dress neatly pressed, her smile too wide for comfort. Eleanor knew that face. She'd seen it in her own childhood albums, in the framed pictures on her aunt's mantel. But there was something wrong with the image. The shadows around the girl's feet didn't quite match the angle of the sunlight, and the bricks of the orphanage behind her seemed to ripple slightly, as if the building itself were breathing. Most disturbing of all was the date scratched into the lower corner in what looked like a child's handwriting. November 11th, 1986. The day her parents died. Eleanor's hands shook as she turned the locket over, finding her own initials engraved on the back. E.F., along with that same cursed date. A cold sweat prickled down her spine. She'd grown up with her aunt in Chicago, had school records, birthday photos, memories of Christmases and summer vacations. She'd never set foot in Hadley, never even heard of the place until this moment. Yet the girl in the photograph was undeniably her. The precinct's fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Eleanor reached for her phone, her fingers dialing the number for records before she'd even made the conscious decision to do so. She needed to see the files on her parents' accident, needed to confirm what she already knew in her bones, that the official story didn't add up, that something had been hidden from her. As she waited on hold, her thumb traced the edge of the locket, the metal warming unnaturally fast against her skin. When she glanced down, the photograph had changed. Now it showed the orphanage's front door slightly ajar, a slice of darkness visible beyond. Something pale glimmered in that darkness. A hand? A face? Eleanor couldn't tell, but her pulse hammered in her throat as she snapped the locket shut and shoved it into her pocket. The records clerk came back on the line, her voice crackling through the receiver. "Detective Voss? I'm sorry, but there's no accident report matching that date. The only record we have for November 11th, 1986 is a missing persons case, a child abduction from the Hadley orphanage." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. "What was the child's name?" A pause, then the rustle of paper. "The file's been redacted, but wait, that's odd. There's a note here in the margin. It just says EV in quotation marks." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, though the weather report had called for clear skies. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the locket in her pocket, the metal now fever-hot against her thigh. She knew then, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that whatever had happened at Hadley all those years ago wasn't over. And whatever had sent her this locket wanted her to come home. The rain started in earnest as Eleanor turned her car onto the overgrown driveway, leading to Hadley Orphanage, the windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. The building loomed ahead, a hulking Gothic structure of gray stone and boarded-up windows, its peaked roofs clawing at the storm-darkened sky. She'd driven through the night to get here, the locket burning a hole in her jacket pocket the entire way. Every time she'd stopped for gas or coffee, she'd checked it, watching in mounting horror as the photograph continued to change. The door opening wider, the darkness beyond growing thicker, the pale shape resolving into something increasingly humanoid. The last time she'd looked, just before turning onto the orphanage grounds, the image had shown the door fully open, and a blurred face peering out from the blackness within. Eleanor killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the rain drum against the roof. The orphanage seemed to watch her through its shuttered windows, its presence oppressive even from a distance. She'd read the files on the drive here. 11 children vanished from Hadley between 1984 and 1986. Their disappearances never solved. The last had been on November 11th, 1986. The day before, and Eleanor Voss was admitted to the orphanage's records. The day before, she supposedly appeared. A crack of lightning split the sky as Eleanor stepped out of the car, the sudden illumination throwing the orphanage's jagged silhouette into sharp relief. The locket seemed to grow heavier in her pocket with each step she took toward the building, its chain slithering against her hip like a living thing. The front door, just as in the photograph, stood slightly ajar. Eleanor drew her service weapon as she pushed it open, the hinges screaming in protest. The smell hit her first. Damp wood and mildew, yes, but underneath it something sweetly rotten, like spoiled milk left in a hot car. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a foyer choked with dust and cobwebs. Something crunched underfoot as she stepped inside. Eleanor looked down to find the floor littered with small bones. Bird or rodent, she couldn't tell. All picked clean and polished white. The walls were covered in children's drawings, their crayon colors faded but still legible. Every single one depicted the same thing: a tall figure with two long arms standing in a doorway, its face a featureless oval. At the bottom of each drawing, scrawled in that same childish handwriting from the locket's inscription, were the words, "He's waiting for you." A floorboard creaked overhead. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as she swung her flashlight upward, illuminating the staircase leading to the second floor. The beam caught movement, a flash of white at the top of the stairs. A child's nightgown. The locket in her pocket grew searing hot, burning through the fabric to brand her skin. Eleanor gasped, fumbling to pull it out, and when she looked up again, the figure stood at the top of the stairs. Not a child, not human. It was tall, too tall, its limbs elongated and jointed wrong, its face smooth and blank as a porcelain doll's. The thing cocked its head at an impossible angle, studying her silently. Then it smiled, revealing a mouth full of needle-thin teeth. The locket sprang open in Eleanor's hand, the photograph now showing the creature reaching toward the viewer with clawed fingers. As the thing on the stairs began its descent, Eleanor realized the terrible truth. She hadn't been sent the locket as a warning. She'd been sent an invitation, and now it was time to meet the family she couldn't remember. The Silent Children. Detective Daniel Graves had seen many crime scenes in his 20 years with the Hollowbrook PD, but none like the one spread before him in the abandoned Miller farmhouse. The dining table was set for 7, fine china, crystal glasses, silverware polished to a mirror shine. At each place sat a child between 8 and 12 years old, their hands folded neatly in their laps, their eyes closed as if in prayer. They might have been sleeping if not for the surgical precision of the incisions across their throats, paper-thin cuts that left their starched collars spotless. But it was their faces that made Daniel's coffee churn in his stomach. Each child was smiling. The first message. The medical examiner peeled back the collar of the smallest victim, a freckle-faced boy no older than 9. No ligature marks, no defensive wounds. Tox screen will take days, but... She hesitated, running a gloved finger along the boy's wrist. These track marks suggest IV sedation, professional grade. Daniel crouched beside the boy's chair, noticing what the ME had missed, a faint shimmer on the child's lower lip. He touched it, coming away with golden glitter on his fingertips. Stage makeup, he muttered. His flashlight beam traveled up the wall behind the table, catching on something metallic. A film projector, its lens pointed at the opposite wall. Daniel hit the switch. The machine whirred to life, casting grainy black and white footage across the peeling wallpaper. The film showed the same dining room, the same table settings, but the chairs were empty. Until they weren't. One by one, children walked into frame and took their seats, their movements synchronized like a macabre ballet. They wore the same clothes as the victims, their hair identically styled. As Daniel watched, a shadow fell across the table. A tall figure just outside the camera's view. The children turned toward it, their faces lighting up with identical beatific smiles. The film cut to static. The town's secret. Hollowbrook's archives reeked of mildew and neglect. Daniel paged through the brittle newspaper clippings, his latex gloves leaving smudges on the yellowed paper. Another one, the archivist whispered, pointing to a 1973 headline, 6 children found peacefully deceased in school auditorium. The black and white photo showed rows of small bodies arranged on a stage, their hands folded over their chests like choir singers. Daniel's throat tightened as he noticed the glitter on their faces. It happened before that too, the archivist said, producing a ledger from 1948. 5 students expired during fire drill. No signs of distress. The pattern emerged with terrifying clarity. Every 25 years, Hollowbrook's children died in perfect stillness. No struggle, no panic. Just quiet obedience and those terrible painted-on smiles. Daniel's radio crackled. "Detective, you need to see this." Back at the farmhouse, crime scene techs had lifted the floorboards beneath the dining table. The space beneath was packed with hundreds of tiny shoes. Mary Jane's, sneakers, patent leather dress shoes, all arranged in neat rows. Buried beneath them was a single film canister labeled "For the Detective." The second film. The projector whirred in the darkness of Daniel's basement. This film showed a classroom from the 1970s, the chalkboard still visible behind the children seated at their desks. A shadow moved across the wall, and the students turned in unison, their glitter-covered faces ecstatic. As the camera zoomed in, Daniel realized with dawning horror that the children's eyes weren't blinking. Their chests didn't rise or fall. They were already dead when the film was shot. The image cut to present day, footage of Daniel himself walking through the farmhouse crime scene earlier that morning. The camera lingered on his face as he examined the victims, then panned to the wall behind him where the shadow of a tall, spindly figure loomed. A child's whisper hissed from the film's audio. "You'll smile for us too, detective." Daniel spun around, his service weapon drawn. His basement was empty, but on the concrete floor near the stairs, a fresh trail of golden glitter led upward toward his sleeping daughter's room. The final reel. The projector still ran as Daniel took the stairs 3 at a time. The film now showed his own daughter's bedroom, the camera hovering over her as she slept. The same spindly shadow stretched across her pink wallpaper, its elongated fingers reaching for her throat. Daniel burst through her door to find her sitting upright in bed, already dressed in her Sunday best. Gold glitter shimmered on her lips. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice not quite her own. "We've been waiting for you." Behind her, the bedroom wall flickered with projected images. Every smiling child from every cycle stretching back to 1898. Their glittering faces turned toward him in unison as the thing in the corner of the room stepped forward, its hands outstretched in greeting. The last thing Daniel saw before the film ran out was his own reflection in the bedroom mirror, his lips smeared with gold, his face frozen in the same ecstatic smile as all the silent children who came before him. And in the silence that followed, the projector loaded itself with a fresh reel labeled Hollowbrook 2048. The whispering walls. Detective Rebecca Shaw's flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the condemned apartment building, illuminating peeling wallpaper that curled like dead skin. The 911 call had come in at 3:17 a.m. A neighbor reported screaming from apartment 4B. But when Rebecca kicked in the door, she found only silence and the overwhelming stench of spoiled milk. The living room walls were covered in writing. Not graffiti, not scratches, words. Thousands of them, all in different handwriting. The first revelation. Rebecca's gloved fingers traced the phrase, "She's in the walls," written in what looked like blood at eye level. Below it, in childish crayon, "I can hear her singing." Higher up near the ceiling, elegant cursive declared, "The building remembers all its children." Her partner, Detective Alvarez, shone his light on the opposite wall. Jesus Christ. Every inch was covered in dates. Birthdays, anniversaries, death dates, stretching back to 1923, when the building first opened. Rebecca's breath caught at one freshly scribbled entry. Shaw, Rebecca, Dobie, June 14th, 1989. Asterisk, her birthday. Before she could react, the flashlight beams caught movement in the kitchen. A shadow darted behind the refrigerator. Rebecca drew her service weapon as something small and pale scrambled into the space between appliances. "Police, come out now!" Only silence answered. Then, a wet clicking sound, like tongue against teeth. Alvarez pried the fridge away from the wall. The space behind it was empty except for a single child's shoe, pristine white except for the sole, which was stained red. Scrawled on the wall behind it in shaky letters, "You shouldn't have come back, Becky." No one had called her Becky since her mother died. The building's memory. The super's records showed apartment 4B had been vacant for 15 years. "Not since the Garza kid disappeared," the old man muttered, avoiding Rebecca's eyes. She pulled the file. Marcos Garza, age 7, vanished from his bed in 2008. No signs of forced entry, no suspects. Just one odd detail. His parents swore they heard giggling from inside the walls that night. Back at the station, Rebecca spread crime scene photos across her desk. The writing covered every surface. Doors, ceilings, even inside cabinets. UV light revealed older layers beneath the visible words like archaeological strata of anguish. One phrase repeated in dozens of handwritings across decades. "The building eats the lonely ones." Asterisk. Her computer dinged with an email from the lab. The red stain on the shoe wasn't paint or dye. It was human tongue tissue. The second night. Rebecca returned alone after midnight, drawn by something she couldn't explain. The moment she re-entered 4B, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Her breath fogged as she played her light over the walls. New writing had appeared. Directly across from the door, in fresh crimson letters, "Welcome home, Rebecca." A wet crunch came from the bedroom. Rebecca moved silently, her service weapon drawn. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar, darkness pooling beyond it. She kicked it open. The walls here were worse. Handprints, dozens of them, in various shades of brown and red, covered every surface. Small handprints, children's handprints. At the center of the far wall, a single sentence stood out in what looked like fresh blood. "You left me here." The closet door creaked open behind her. Rebecca spun, her flashlight illuminating a small figure standing inside. A boy, maybe 7 years old, wearing pajamas crusted with something dark. His lips were sewn shut with coarse black thread. When he raised his head, Rebecca's blood turned to ice. She knew that face. It stared back at her from her own childhood photos. This was her brother, the brother who had died in a car accident when she was 5. The brother she had supposedly never actually met. The boy's stitched lips twitched as the walls around them began to whisper. The truth in the walls. Rebecca's flashlight clattered to the floor as the whispers grew louder. Hundreds of voices speaking over each other in a cacophony of pain. The handprints on the walls began to move, sliding downward like melting wax. Her brother reached for her with blackened fingers. The last thing Rebecca saw before the darkness took her was the wall behind him, splitting open like a grinning mouth, revealing rows of yellowed photographs inside, each showing a child standing in the same room, their mouths sewn shut, their eyes wide with terror. The newest photo was still developing. It showed Rebecca, age 5, holding hands with the boy in pajamas. Written beneath it in familiar handwriting, her mother's, were the words, "I had to choose just one." The final entry. When Alvarez returned at dawn, he found the apartment empty, except for 2 things. Rebecca's service weapon, still holstered on the kitchen counter, and a new phrase written in fresh blood on the living room wall. The building is hungry again. Outside, the rising sun painted the brick facade the color of dried blood. Somewhere inside, a child began to giggle. The sound came from inside the walls. The Shadow Sanctuary. Detective Nathan Carter had investigated over 200 homicide scenes in his 15 years with the Metropolitan Police, but nothing could have prepared him for the tableau awaiting him in the abandoned St. Ignatius orphanage. The chapel's vaulted ceiling soared 40 feet above him, its once vibrant frescoes now blackened by decades of soot and neglect. Moonlight streamed through the shattered, stained glass, casting fractured halos of color across the scene below. 12 small beds formed a perfect circle in the center of the sanctuary, each containing a child between 8 and 12 years old. They lay on their backs with hands folded across their chests like tiny saints in repose. Not a single drop of blood marred the crisp white sheets. The first revelation. Dr. Eleanor Whitmore, the chief medical examiner, adjusted her glasses as she examined the nearest child, a dark-haired boy no older than 9. No signs of trauma, no defensive wounds, pupils fully dilated. She lifted one small hand, revealing faint needle marks between the fingers. They were sedated intravenously. Professionally, Nathan crouched beside the bed, his flashlight revealing strange markings on the floor, interlocking circles and angular symbols etched into the ancient wood. This wasn't just a killing, this was a ritual. A crime scene tech called from the altar. "Detective, you need to see this." The massive oak altar had been turned to face the circle of beds. Carved into its surface were 12 names, each corresponding to a child in the beds. Below them, fresh blood still glistened in the grooves of a 13th name, Nathaniel Carter. Nathan's breath caught. That had been his name before the adoption, a fact buried deep in sealed records. The orphanage's secret. The archives room at City Hall smelled of mildew and decaying paper. Nathan pored over yellowed documents, his latex gloves leaving smudges on brittle pages. The orphanage's records told a disturbing story. Children disappearing every 13 years since 1923, always in groups of 12, always from the same dormitory. The archivist, an elderly woman with clouded eyes, placed a trembling hand over a 1949 photograph. The Shadow Sanctuary, they called it. Some said the building made deals. The photo showed 12 children standing in the same chapel formation as the victims, their faces blurred as if they'd been moving. But Nathan's attention locked onto the priest at the altar, Father Ignatius Blackwood. The man's shadow didn't match his posture. It stood separate, taller, its arms outstretched toward the children. Nathan's radio crackled. "Detective?" The lab found something. The second revelation. Back at the chapel, the forensic team had lifted floorboards beneath the altar. The space beneath contained hundreds of small bones, finger bones based on their size, each wrapped in parchment inscribed with names. The most recent bundle contained 13 bones instead of 12. The parchment bore Nathan's birth name and today's date. A tech handed him a decaying journal found with the bones. The entry for October 13th, 1987, the night Nathan was abandoned at the orphanage, read, "The sanctuary demands 13 this cycle. The shadow has chosen its vessel." The third night. Nathan returned alone at midnight, drawn by something deeper than professional curiosity. The moment he stepped into the sanctuary, the temperature plummeted. His breath fogged as 12 small shadows detached from the walls and took positions around the circle of beds. The 13th shadow emerged from the altar, taller, broader, its outline bristling with what might have been antlers or branches. It pointed a elongated finger toward the empty space at the circle's center. A child's voice whispered from the rafters, "Your bed is ready, Nathaniel." The shadows began to chant in a language that slithered against Nathan's eardrums. He drew his service weapon as the floor symbols ignited with cold blue fire. The bed sheets ruffled as though disturbed by unseen movement. Nathan's flashlight died. In the sudden darkness, 12 pairs of eyes snapped open, glowing amber orbs fixed on him with terrible recognition. The final covenant. When backup arrived at dawn, they found the chapel empty save for 13 freshly made beds. On the altar lay Nathan's service weapon, his badge, and an open journal. The final entry, in handwriting identical to the 1987 priest's, read, "The sanctuary is complete. We walk in shadow now." Outside, the rising sun cast 13 elongated shadows across the orphanage lawn. None of them matched the officer standing there. And in the chapel's rafters, something ancient stirred, satisfied. For now. Epilogue. 1 year later, a rookie detective responded to a disturbance at St. Ignatius. In the sanctuary, she found 13 beds arranged in a perfect circle. On the altar lay a journal open to a new page. It bore her name, her real name, the one even she barely remembered, and today's date. As she reached for it, 12 small shadows detached from the walls and began to chant. The hushing tree. Detective Lila Vasquez had seen crime scenes that would give seasoned officers nightmares, but nothing compared to the sight awaiting her in Black Pine Hollow. The ancient oak stood at the center of the clearing, its gnarled branches stretching like skeletal fingers against the dawn sky. From those branches hung 12 children's dresses in small suits, swaying gently in the autumn breeze. Each outfit was pristine, pressed and spotless, as if waiting for their owners to return. But it was what lay beneath the tree that made Lila's breath catch. 12 pairs of children's shoes arranged in a perfect circle, all of them filled with dark, coagulated blood. The first whisper. "Not a drop on the clothes," muttered Dr. Ruiz, the medical examiner, as he examined the hanging garments. "These were placed here after death, carefully." Lila crouched by the shoes, her gloved fingers tracing the rim of a tiny Mary Jane. The blood inside was still tacky. "They bled out somewhere else. This is just presentation." A breeze stirred the leaves above them, and for a moment Lila thought she heard whispering, not from the woods around them, but from the tree itself. Her radio crackled. "Detective, you need to see this." At the base of the oak, crime scene techs had uncovered dozens of small bones buried in the roots. Wrapped around each was a lock of hair tied with red string. The most recent bundle contained chestnut brown hair still damp at the roots. Lila's stomach lurched. She'd brushed that same hair just last night. Her daughter's, the town's secret. Black Pine's archives were housed in a crumbling municipal building that smelled of mildew and old secrets. The librarian, Mrs. Greer, had eyes like frosted glass and hands that trembled as she pulled a ledger from 1937. "The hushing tree," she whispered, pointing to a yellowed newspaper clipping. The photo showed the same oak, its branches then heavy with children's clothing. "Comes alive every 33 years. Takes 12 children, always 12. Lila flipped through the ledger. The dates told the story. 1937, 1970, now. Always exactly 33 years apart. Always 12 victims. Mrs. Greer's bony finger tapped a list of names from 1970. My sister was the 12th. They never found a single drop of blood in those clothes either. Lila's vision swam as she spotted the final entry, a name added in different ink after the original list. Greer, Martha, age 9, found alive. The old woman's milky eyes met Lila's. I wasn't supposed to remember. The second night. Lila returned to the tree as dusk fell, her service weapon heavy in her hand. The crime scene tape fluttered like ghostly streamers in the wind. Something crunched underfoot. A 13th dress now hung from the lowest branch, a miniature replica of Lila's own tan trench coat. Beneath it sat a single detective's badge, its metal gleaming despite the dim light. Her badge, the one currently pinned to her chest. Lila reached up to confirm its presence just as the whispering began, not from the tree this time, but from the woods around her. Children's voices, soft and sing-song, chanting words that made her skull vibrate. One more, the roots are hungry. Her radio suddenly blared to life with dispatch calling about a missing child. A girl last seen wearing pink pajamas with unicorns. Lila's knees gave way. She'd kissed her daughter goodnight in those same pajamas just hours ago. The offering. The roots of the hushing tree had begun to move. Lila clawed at the earth as the whispers grew louder, her fingers bleeding as she dug. The soil gave way too easily, revealing not dirt but hair. Long chestnut strands winding through the roots like veins. A whimper rose from below. Lila tore at the roots with bare hands now, splinters embedding in her palms. The whispers became screams as the tree's branches thrashed above her. Her fingers closed around something warm, a small hand. As she pulled her daughter free, the tree let out a sound like 1,000 sighing voices. The hanging clothes stilled. The whispers ceased. But beneath them, Lila heard something new. The slow, wet sound of roots shifting beneath the earth. And she knew. The tree would wait. 33 years was nothing to something that old. And it always took 12. Epilogue. The town records show 12 children went missing that October. The memorial plaque lists 12 names. But Lila Vasquez knows the truth as she watches her now-grown daughter brush her own child's hair. The same chestnut brown as all the offerings before. She counts the years and waits for the roots to remember.